6 months after Pearl Harbor, America was losing the Pacific War. Japan had conquered an empire stretching from Burma to the Solomon Islands in 180 days. The rising sun flag flew over Singapore, Hong Kong, the Philippines, and Wake Island. American sailors still tasted the ash of their burning ships. Americans in California scanned the horizon for enemy carriers. The question was not if Japan would strike the American mainland, but when. So before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, let's ease into today's history journey together. June the 4th, 1942, 400 kilometers northwest of Midway Atoll, 0630 hours. Lieutenant Commander John Waldron gripped the control stick of his Douglas Devastator torpedo bomber as 15 Japanese Zero fighters dove toward his squadron like hawks on sparrows. No fighter escort, no cloud cover. Just 15 obsolete American planes carrying torpedoes against the entire Japanese carrier fleet. His hands were steady, but he knew the mathematics. In 2 minutes, most of his men would be dead. How did America end up betting everything on this single morning? Why were untested pilots flying planes slower than the enemy fighters hunting them? And what decision made in the next 6 hours would determine whether Japan or America controlled the Pacific Ocean for the next century? Waldron's fury went deeper than military duty. His grandmother was Cherokee. He had grown up on stories of broken treaties and forced marches. He understood what it meant when a stronger power decided your land, your people, your future were negotiable. 6 months earlier, he had watched smoke rise over Pearl Harbor from his home in Honolulu. His daughter asked if the Japanese were coming to their house. He had no answer. He would not let his children inherit a world where America surrendered the ocean. But the strategic reality was crushing. Japan's carrier pilots were the finest in the world, veterans of China, hardened by 4 years of combat. They flew the Mitsubishi Zero, a fighter faster and more maneuverable than anything America possessed. Japanese torpedoes ran true at 46 knots. Their dive bombers hit targets 70% of the time. Their admirals had never lost a major carrier engagement. Admiral Nimitz inherited this nightmare. A soft-spoken Texan who became commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet 10 days after Pearl Harbor, he walked through the wreckage of Battleship Row and made a cold assessment. The battleships were gone. America's future depended on 3 aircraft carriers: Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. 3 carriers against Japan's 6 fleet carriers. Then in late May, Commander Joseph Rochefort handed Nimitz a decoded intercept. The Japanese were planning a massive operation. Target, designated AF. Date, early June. Rochefort believed AF meant Midway. Nimitz asked the question that would decide the war. How certain are you? 85%, sir? 85%. Not certainty, not proof. Just one cryptanalyst's educated guess based on fragmented radio intercepts. If Rochefort was right, Nimitz could set an ambush. If Rochefort was wrong, Nimitz would lose his carriers defending an empty island while Japan struck Hawaii, Panama, or the American coast. Nimitz made his decision in seconds. He would gamble everything. He ordered Enterprise and Hornet to depart Pearl Harbor immediately. He ordered Yorktown, damaged at the Battle of the Coral Sea 2 weeks earlier, repaired in 72 hours instead of 3 months. Dockyard workers welded steel plates over torpedo holes while ammunition was loaded. She departed Pearl Harbor trailing repair crews who would continue working during the voyage. 3 carriers, 233 aircraft, against Admiral Yamamoto's 4 carriers, 248 aircraft, and the most experienced naval aviators on the planet. The mathematics favored Japan in every calculation. But nobody knew that American cryptanalysts had given Nimitz one invisible weapon. He knew where Yamamoto would strike. He knew when. Intelligence could compensate for inferior numbers, but only if Nimitz positioned his carriers perfectly and struck first. But this is when Nimitz began preparing for the battle that would change history. June the 2nd, 1942. Point Luck, 450 kilometers northeast of Midway. Admiral Raymond Spruance stood on the bridge of USS Enterprise and stared at empty ocean. Somewhere to the west, 4 Japanese carriers were steaming toward Midway with 108 Zero fighters, 108 dive bombers, and 93 torpedo planes. The most powerful naval strike force ever assembled. and Spruance had orders to sink them all with 3 carriers and pilots who had never seen combat. The Japanese did not know the Americans were here. That was the only advantage. Surprise. One chance to strike first. But Yamamoto's plan was elegant and deadly. He would bomb Midway's airfield into rubble, destroy American land-based planes, then lure whatever remained of the Pacific Fleet into a trap. His 4 carriers would be supported by 11 battleships, 16 cruisers, and 46 destroyers. A hammer designed to crush American resistance in one afternoon. Nimitz had no battleships at Midway, no cruiser support within 500 kilometers, just 3 carriers hiding northeast of the atoll, waiting for the perfect moment to launch. If American scouts spotted the Japanese carriers too late, the ambush would fail. If they attacked too early, Japanese combat air patrol would slaughter the strike force. Timing was everything. What nobody expected was how catastrophically the first American attacks would fail. June the 4th, 04:30 hours. A Catalina patrol plane spotted the Japanese fleet 240 kilometers northwest of Midway. The message crackled through radios across the American task force. 4 carriers, Yamamoto's entire strike force, heading southeast at 25 knots. At 0600 hours, 108 Japanese planes launched from 4 carriers and turned toward Midway. Zeros, dive bombers, and torpedo planes flying in perfect formation. Below them, dolphins raced through the water. The sky was cloudless. Visibility unlimited. On Midway, Marine pilots scrambled into obsolete Buffalo fighters. They knew their planes were slower than Zeros. They knew their odds. They took off anyway. 27 Marines against 108 Japanese attackers. The sky above Midway erupted into a whirling knife fight at 3,000 meters. Within 15 minutes, 17 Marine fighters were shot down. The Japanese bombed the airfield, destroyed fuel tanks, shattered the command post, but Midway's runways remained operational. The Japanese strike commander radioed back, "Second strike necessary." That message changed everything. Admiral Nagumo, commanding the Japanese carriers, faced an impossible choice. His planes were returning from Midway, low on fuel and ammunition. He needed to recover them quickly. But he had also spotted American aircraft approaching from the east. Were they from Midway or from carriers? If carriers, where were they? Nagumo ordered his reserve planes, armed with torpedoes for ship attack, rearmed with bombs for a second Midway strike. On 4 carrier decks, Japanese crews frantically removed torpedoes and loaded bombs. Fuel lines snaked across the decks. Ammunition handlers sprinted between aircraft. It would take 40 minutes. At 07:05 hours, a Japanese scout finally radioed. "Enemy carrier sighted." Nagumo froze. "American carriers. Here, now!" He ordered his planes rearmed again. "Remove the bombs, reload the torpedoes." Chaos spread across 4 carrier decks as crews reversed their work. Precious minutes evaporated. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Waldron led Torpedo Squadron 8 toward the Japanese fleet without fighter escort. His orders were to wait for dive bombers and fighters to coordinate the attack. He ignored them. The Japanese carriers were vulnerable right now, planes on deck, fuel lines exposed. He pushed his throttle forward. His 15 Devastator torpedo bombers flew at 190 kilometers per hour. Zeros flew at 530 kilometers per hour. It was mathematics written in fire. At 0800 hours, Zeros dove on Waldron's squadron like wolves. Machine gun bullets ripped through fabric and aluminum. 1 Devastator exploded in midair, then another, then 3 more. Waldron's plane caught fire, but he held his course toward the carriers, dropping to 15 meters above the ocean, trying desperately to launch his torpedo. A Zero pilot named Shigematsu Yasuhiro watched the Americans die and felt something unexpected. Respect. These men knew they would not survive. They attacked anyway. Waldron's plane disintegrated. Then the next, and the next. 14 torpedo bombers shot down in 12 minutes. One pilot, Ensign George Gay, survived by clinging to a floating seat cushion. He watched from the water as 2 more American torpedo squadrons arrived and died the same way. 41 torpedo bombers launched that morning. 35 were shot down without scoring a single hit. The Japanese were winning. Their carriers were untouched. Their Zeros dominated the sky. American bodies floated in the Pacific. Victory seemed certain. But what nobody knew was that high above the carnage, unnoticed in the chaos, 37 American dive bombers had just arrived over the Japanese fleet. On June the 4th, at 0920 hours, everything was ready. This would be different. June the 4th, 1942, 0920 hours, 5,000 meters above the Japanese carrier fleet, Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey was lost. His dive bombers had been searching for the Japanese carriers for 90 minutes. Fuel gauges showed 15 minutes remaining before he would have to ditch in the ocean. Then he spotted a single Japanese destroyer racing northeast, white wake cutting through blue water like a chalk line. McCluskey made a guess. The destroyer was chasing something, or rejoining the fleet. He turned his 37 dive bombers to follow. 4 minutes later, he saw them. 4 Japanese carriers in a perfect box formation, decks crowded with aircraft being refueled and rearmed. Fuel lines, bombs, torpedoes, a floating ammunition depot. McCluskey keyed his radio. Attack immediately. The Japanese lookouts never saw them coming. Every Zero fighter was at sea level, finishing off the last American torpedo bombers. The sky above the carriers was empty, undefended. At 0922 hours, McCluskey rolled his dauntless dive bomber into a 70-degree dive, engine screaming, speed building past 500 kilometers per hour. 36 more dive bombers followed, screaming down through thin air like falling meteors. On the carrier Kaga, Lieutenant Tadashi Kusumi looked up from rearming a Zero fighter and saw American dive bombers plummeting from the sky. He had 3 seconds to process what was happening. Not enough time to run. Not enough time to pray. The first bomb struck Kaga's flight deck at 0924 hours and punched through to the hangar deck below, detonating among 18 fueled and armed aircraft. The explosion ripped through the ship like a blowtorch through paper. Fuel ignited, torpedoes cooked off. Secondary explosions tore the carrier apart from inside. 15 seconds later, 3 bombs hit the carrier Akagi, Yamamoto's flagship. 1 bomb penetrated the middle elevator and exploded in the hangar among planes loaded with fuel and munitions. Fire spread instantly. Pilots trapped below deck screamed as temperatures reached 1,000 degrees Celsius. On the carrier, Soryu, dive bombers scored 3 direct hits in 40 seconds. The ship's captain, seeing his vessel engulfed in flames, gave the order to abandon ship. Sailors jumped into the Pacific as ammunition magazines detonated beneath their feet. In 5 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were burning wrecks. The most powerful naval strike force in history, untouched since the war began, was dying. But the 4th carrier, Hiryu, had been separated from the main formation. She was untouched. Her captain immediately launched every available aircraft, 40 dive bombers and fighters, toward the American fleet. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Japanese dive bombers found USS Yorktown. 3 bombs smashed through her flight deck. 1 detonated in the uptake, snuffing out fires in 5 of her 6 boilers. The carrier went dead in the water, listing powerless. American sailors fought fires and choking smoke. Many drowned below decks as compartments flooded. 2 hours later, a second Japanese strike put 2 torpedoes into Yorktown's hull. The ship rolled 16 degrees to port. The captain ordered abandon ship. Sailors slid down ropes into the ocean as their carrier died beneath them. But American dive bombers had already found Hiryu. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 bombs turned Japan's last carrier into a burning tomb. Her captain, choosing honor over survival, went down with his ship. By sunset on June the 4th, 4 Japanese carriers were sinking or sunk. 2,500 Japanese sailors were dead. Japan's most experienced carrier pilots, men who had trained for 10 years, were gone. Replacement pilots would train for 18 months instead of 5 years. The quality gap would never close. Yamamoto canceled the Midway invasion. His fleet retreated west. For the first time since December of 1941, Japan was running. The strategic consequences unfolded across 3 years. Japan would never again threaten Hawaii or the American mainland. America's industrial power, given time by Midway, produced 24 fleet carriers by 1945. Japan produced 6. The mathematics of industrial warfare are unforgiving. But what happened next surprised everyone. Japan fought with savage determination for 3 more years. Iwo Jima, Okinawa, kamikazes. Every island cost thousands of lives. Japanese civilians prepared to fight American invasion with bamboo spears. The war that Midway decided would not end until atomic bombs fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For the families of those 2,500 Japanese sailors who died at Midway, June the 4th is still a day of mourning. Their fathers and grandfathers fought with courage for a cause they believed was just. War writes history in the blood of ordinary men following orders from distant capitals. 3 lessons from 6 hours that decided a war. Lesson 1. Information is the ultimate force multiplier. Nimitz had 3 carriers against 4, untested pilots against veterans, inferior aircraft against the best in the world. But he knew where the enemy would be and when they would arrive. That single piece of intelligence, earned by cryptanalysts working in a basement, multiplied American combat power by a factor of 3. In war, in business, in life, knowing what your opponent will do next is worth more than superior numbers. Lesson 2. Timing beats strength. The Japanese carriers were invincible until the moment their decks were covered with armed aircraft and fuel lines. That vulnerability lasted 20 minutes. McCluskey arrived in minute 18. 5 minutes earlier, he would have found empty ocean. 5 minutes later, the Japanese combat air patrol would have returned to altitude. Perfect timing created the opportunity. Preparation allowed America to seize it. Lesson 3. Defeat and victory are both teachers, but only if you listen. Japan won every carrier battle for 6 months and learned that their tactics were perfect, their pilots invincible, their destiny assured. America lost every battle for 6 months and learned that their torpedoes did not work, their tactics failed, their aircraft were obsolete. By June, America had fixed the problems Japan never knew it had. Victory breeds complacency. Defeat, if you survive it, breeds wisdom. If you found this story valuable, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the hidden stories that changed our world. And here's a question worth considering. If one cryptanalyst's 85% certainty changed the outcome of World War II, what decisions are you avoiding right now because you are waiting for 100% certainty that will never come?